Hey grade 1, welcome to science. We're going to be doing chapter 12, lesson 4, which is about how do builders get wood for a house. So we're going to be doing this worksheet first. As we know, we're going to read the first 3 questions and only answer the first 3 questions. So reminder to pause me as you need to. That's the nice thing about the YouTube videos. So question number 1 here says, today loggers use axes to cut down trees. Is that true or not true? Number 2 says trucks take logs to a sawmill. Is that true or not true? And number 3 says logs are cut into boards at a sawmill. Is that true or not true? Now remember, it's okay if you don't know these answers because we haven't learned about the material yet. So let's dive into it. So here we are on page 352 to start, lesson 4, and it's titled, How Do Builders Get Wood for a House? So here it says technology changes over time, which we know. I've experienced a lot of technology changes, and I know your parents have seen a lot of technology changes over the years. Long ago, loggers used an axe to cut down trees. So instead of using machines, they had to use their physical bodies with an axe to cut down those trees, and that was what you call hard labor. Now, hard labor means it's a very, very difficult task for them to do. It would require a lot of physical activity. It would be like going to the gym. It's insane how much physical activity went into it. And it took a lot of time for that to be done. So now loggers use a machine called a tree shear to cut down the trees. So a tree shears makes cutting trees easier. So they get more work done and they're able to cut down more trees depending on what they're doing. Now, it's not always good to cut down trees, but sometimes we have dead trees, which are bad for our ecosystem, so they get cut down. Or we could have trees that are about to fall, and they'll choose to cut them down to prevent maybe it hitting some wires that can cause a fire or a power outage. They might cut them down because it might fall on someone's house. For example, my neighbor's backyard, they had a tree and it started leaning, and it was a big tree, big enough to crush their house and part of my house at home. And they decided that they needed to cut it down and they needed someone to come and help. So they hired someone because it was for their safety. So logs are heavy. As we know, trees are extremely heavy. So long ago, some loggers used animals to move the logs, so that the animals would be like almost like a horse or other animals, that they would have something that they could put the logs inside, almost like a carriage in a way, and then they would move that. But now loggers use something called a grappler to move the logs, which you can see on this image on page 353. Now, a grappler makes moving logs easier. It can grab a lot of logs, which are heavy, instead of one of those logs would probably take 2 or 3 people to carry. So now we're here on page 354, which is moving logs into the sawmill. So the heavy logs need to be loaded onto the truck. So they use the machine to get that on there. So the long-armed knuckle boom machine grabs the heavy logs. Then the machine loads the logs onto the truck. So we can kind of see what it looks like at the bottom. But before we look at those bottom pictures with that timeline, I'm going to look at page 355 and just read some of that writing there. So it says, when the truck is full, it will take the logs to the sawmill. So once they've loaded up the truck with all of the logs they have, they will send it off. So then the logs are made into boards when they arrive at the sawmill. All right, so if we look at all these pictures, it kind of shows us a little timeline in like a bubble picture formation, which is really interesting. So here in that first picture, it says, first, the long-armed knuckle boom loads the logs onto the truck. So that's our first step when it's moving the logs to the sawmill. Our second step now says, next, the trucks take the logs to the sawmill. So once that truck's loaded, they start traveling with it. This third picture here, our third step, it says, then another machine takes the bark off the logs. They take the bark off of it, the outside layer of the tree, of the logs. And then lastly, our last step when it's moving the logs to the sawmill is the logs are cut into boards. Now a builder can use them to build a house. So those are kind of all the steps that you need in order to get the logs all the way to the sawmill, which then we can use, or builders can use. We can use them for houses and other projects. So with that, we're going to go back to this sheet, and it says after you read lesson 4. So we're going to answer the same 3 questions now that we've read it all. So let's start here. We have number 1. Today, loggers use an axe to cut down trees. Is that true or not true? Number 2 says trucks take logs to a sawmill. Is that true or not true? And 3 says logs are cut into boards at a sawmill. Is that true or not true? Wonderful. So now we're going to move on to this page. At the top here we have a word bank including the words sawmill, technology, axe, and logs. So each of those words are going to be used once in the next 4 questions. So question number 1 says, today's loggers use new blank to cut down trees. Number 2 says, a long time ago, a logger would use a blank to cut down a tree. Number 3 says, after trees are cut down, they are called blank. And lastly, number 4, the trees are then moved to a blank. And then our last piece, we have put things in order. So we have to put these pictures in order. So 5, you're going to put the pictures in order to show how the trees end up being part of the house. You're going to write first, second, third, and last under these pictures. So how does it start? And then where do we get our finished project of that house? Okay, so that's your task for this. If you have any questions, let me know. Otherwise, great work, grade 1, and thank you so much for joining me. Take care. Bye.